first thing that felt wrong was the silence on the line. It was a weekday, mid-morning, and I was standing on a gravel turnout off State Route 1 with a harness already half on, gloves tucked under my arm, and a crew truck idling behind me. The ocean was down below, white line after white line folding into the rocks. Above us, the cliff had the usual mess of loose dirt, ice plant, and old drill scars from past work. We had a normal plan: put in a few new bolts, tension a run of rockfall netting that had sagged after last winter, then get off the face before the wind picked up. My supervisor's phone kept ringing, and he kept stepping away to answer it. Every time he came back, his face looked flatter. Not scared, not angry, flat. The sort of face a person gets when the words he is hearing do not match the world he is standing in. He said, "Stand down," and it came out too quick, almost practiced, which meant he had heard it from somebody else who was trying to sound calm. He told us to pull gear back into the truck. No work today, no work tomorrow. Road closure extended. New instructions coming from the highway agency. He told us not to argue with law enforcement if somebody stopped us. Then he said, "Just get home." Nobody joked. Nobody complained. That part stuck with me. Rope access crews complain about everything. Heat, cold, anchor spacing, traffic, per diem. That day, everybody just moved. Carabiners clinked. Tool bags got shoved into bins. I watched one of the new guys, a kid named Darren, try to zip a bag twice because his hands kept missing the zipper pull. He looked embarrassed that I saw it. A state trooper rolled past slow with lights off, then another, then an ambulance that did not have its siren on. No cars followed. The road, which usually had rental SUVs and motorcyclists pushing corners, started to thin out. I drove north toward my place inland, and the farther I got from our turnout, the more weird it felt. People were pulled over on the shoulder, doors open, standing around with phones in their hands. A couple trucks were stopped across from each other, and the drivers were talking through open windows, faces tight. At one point, I passed a sedan stopped at a bad angle, half in the lane, half on the shoulder, with nobody inside. The driver door was open and rocking in the wind. By the time I hit the first spot where my phone usually picked up decent service, it was a mess of texts. Some from my crew, some from my sister in Salinas, some from a neighbor. The words were all the same, just rearranged. People saying something was happening. People asking if I had heard. People forwarding shaky videos. People telling everybody to stay home. I told myself it was another wildfire run, another evacuation chain, another rumor wave. We live in California. Bad news is a season. Then I got to the gas station off the highway near a little cluster of stores, and the first real thing happened in front of my face. The lot was jammed. Cars were angled wherever they fit. One pump had a line of 5 vehicles stacked behind it, engines running. A man was yelling at the cashier through the glass door, pushing his face close and stabbing the air with a finger. The cashier was shaking his head and pointing at a paper sign taped to the inside of the window. No fuel, no refunds, cash only. The paper was already wrinkled from hands slapping it. I did not need fuel, but I wanted water and something quick to eat. I parked in the back where I could pull out fast. I stepped out and the air smelled wrong, not smoke, not gas, more a sour trash smell that made me look around for an overflowing dumpster. A woman stumbled near the ice chest outside the door. Her hair was tangled and her shirt was inside out. Her arms were stiff, held away from her body, and her eyes had a dull focus that did not land on anything. She bumped the ice chest and did not react. She drifted sideways, slow, then turned and walked straight into a parked car, face first, hard enough to thump. Still no reaction, only a little head turn, and then she pressed her palms against the hood and pushed. A man near the pumps saw it and shouted, "Hey, lady!" in a sharp voice that made everybody glance that way for 1 second. She turned toward the sound. Not quick, not normal. Her head led, then her shoulders. Then she moved toward him with the same stiff drift. The man took a step back. Somebody laughed once, nervous, then stopped. The woman kept coming. The man said something again, lower, and lifted one hand as if he could guide her away. When she got close, she grabbed his forearm with both hands and pulled it toward her mouth. The man yelled and tried to yank away. She held on. Her jaw worked in a way I did not have a word for, not a bite, not a kiss, just a grinding clamp. The man hit her with his free hand, then punched, then shoved. The shove did nothing. She stayed attached to his arm. The man stumbled, his feet scraping, and then he dropped to one knee. His other hand grabbed at her hair. He pulled hard, and the scalp did not move much. Only the head angle changed. She kept clamped on his arm. The man's mouth opened wide and sound came out in bursts, not words. That moment flipped the whole lot. People backed away from the pumps. Somebody screamed. A car door slammed. The yelling at the cashier stopped because everybody's attention snapped to the woman and the man on the ground. I did not run to help. I hate that sentence. I keep saying it anyway because it is true. I stood behind my open truck door and watched how nobody moved toward them. One guy reached into his car and came out with a tire iron. He took 2 steps forward, then stopped and looked at the crowd, waiting for somebody else to decide first. The woman lifted her head for a second, and there was dark wet on her face and on the man's arm. She did not look injured. She looked busy. Then she leaned back in. I got back into my truck. I shut the door, locked it, and started the engine. My hands did the motions from habit: key, shift, mirror check. I did not look at the pumps again. I backed out and left the lot without buying anything. On the drive home, I tried to build a normal explanation. Drugs, mental break, some freak incident that would get handled by the next ambulance and the next report. My brain kept offering those because the alternative meant everything was about to change. I did not accept the alternative yet. The radio in my truck cut in and out. A coastal station kept repeating a short message about staying indoors and avoiding contact with sick individuals. The voice sounded tired, not urgent. That made it worse. Urgent voices are easier to ignore. Tired voices feel final. I made it home, ate a piece of bread standing at my kitchen counter, and opened my gear bins. I pulled out my dry bag, the tough one I used for ocean jobs. I put in food that would not spoil fast. Jerky, crackers, peanut butter packets, canned fruit, a couple protein bars I had left from a job. I put in 2 bottles of water and then went to the tub and filled more. I did not tell myself I was packing for the end of the world. I told myself I was packing for a storm and a road closure. My phone rang. My supervisor. He said he was heading inland with his family. He told me not to go back to the coast. He told me the highway agency was pulling staff from yards. He told me there had been incidents at a field office. His voice kept drifting into a whisper, then back to normal. I asked him what he meant by incidents. He said he did not want to say it out loud. Then he said, "People are attacking people," and he hung up. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and stared at the wall. The wall had a small stain near the baseboard from a leak I never fixed. I thought about calling my sister again. I thought about driving to her. Then I thought about traffic, crowds, and gas stations. I own climbing gear. I know places other people do not see. I know anchors that have held my weight hundreds of times. I know a maintenance ledge on the cliff above State Route 1 near Big Sur that most drivers never notice because it sits in shadow, cut into the rock under a slight overhang. It was used for rockfall netting work years back, a narrow strip of concrete and dirt with old bolts in a pattern that told me somebody planned for fall protection and material handling. The ledge is not a destination. It is not a viewpoint. It is not on a map. It is a place that exists for workers and for nobody else. That night, I drove back toward the coast. The roads were not fully dead yet, but the traffic had a strange rhythm. People drove too fast in empty stretches, then too slow near intersections. Several times I saw cars stopped in lanes with hazard lights on and nobody moving inside. I passed one wreck where a pickup had climbed a guardrail and ended up nose down in brush. No responders, no flares, no one directing traffic, just headlights sliding around it. When I reached the closed section of State Route 1, the official barricades were still there, big orange pieces with reflective stripes. The sign said, "Road closed, local traffic only." There was nobody guarding it. The highway beyond looked empty, lit by my own headlights and the thin white line of surf below. I pulled over where I knew a maintenance access point existed. It was not a road, more a widened shoulder with a gap in the brush that led to a steep dirt path used by crews when we staged rock drills. I killed my lights, sat in the cab, and listened. Wind, surf, occasional small stones ticking down the face. No voices, no engines. I put on my harness in the dark, using my headlamp with the red setting. I clipped in a lanyard. I checked my knots twice. I forced myself to go slow because fast hands make mistakes when the mind is running ahead. I carried the dry bag on my back, rope coil over one shoulder, a small bolt kit in a pouch, mostly habit. My handheld radio was in the bag too, the little one I used for crew talk. I turned it on once, heard static, turned it back off. Batteries are food in this sort of situation. The first anchors were where I remembered. 2 half-inch bolts with hangers, rusty but intact, drilled into a seam of hard rock. I ran my rope through, built a redundant tie-in, and tested weight. The rope hummed under tension. The bolts held. I moved down the face, feet on small edges, one hand on the rope, one hand on rock. My headlamp made the rock look flat and shiny. I shut the light off twice and let my eyes adjust because light travels on the coast. A single bright beam on a cliff can be seen from the road. When I reached the ledge, I stepped onto it and felt the relief of a stable surface. It was narrow, maybe 3 feet deep in the best spot, with a short section that widened near a corner. Salt had crusted parts of the concrete. A thin line of plants had taken hold where dirt gathered. I unshouldered the dry bag and set it against the back wall. I clipped a cow's tail into an old bolt and sat down with my back against rock. I listened again. Nothing moved except the ocean and the wind. It was quiet enough that I could hear my own gear shift when I adjusted my legs. That told me I was alone in that pocket of cliff. I did not sleep much. I stretched a small tarp between 2 bolts and a rock horn and pulled it tight. The tarp flapped. I adjusted. It still flapped, less. I tied the corners down with short lengths of cord and used tape to quiet any loose ends. I ate a handful of crackers. I took 1 sip of water and forced myself to stop. Then I lay down with my harness still on and my lanyard clipped. At some point close to dawn, I heard voices on the highway. Not close, but clear enough that I could pick out words. 2 people, maybe 3. The voices moved, then stopped, then moved again. The pattern of people looking at something, arguing about it, then walking. I stayed still. My headlamp stayed off. One voice said something about the closure. Another said something about getting to Monterey. Then the voices drifted away north. I never saw them. I did not want to. Morning brought fog, thick and low. It hid the road. It hid the ocean. It made the cliffs sweat, water beating on rock and running in thin trails. I held my tarp up to catch drips and watched how water behaved. I found a little groove that collected moisture and fed it toward one corner. That corner became my first water plan. I anchored the tarp in a better shape, pitched to funnel drips into a cut-off bottle. It took time. It took patience. I watched the bottle fill slow. That bottle mattered more than the entire bag of food. By mid-morning, I heard the first screams. It came from down the road, muffled by fog, then sharper as the wind shifted. It was not a single scream. It was a burst of shouting, then screaming, then a sound that carried longer, a long vowel that turned into coughing. I did not move toward it. I sat, clipped in, and listened until the sound stopped. After that, there was only wind and surf again. I stayed on the ledge for 2 days without leaving. On the second night, I turned on my handheld radio for 1 minute, just to check. Static. A faint hiss that almost resolved into a voice, then broke apart again. I shut it off. I could feel the urge to keep turning it on. The urge to chase information. I did not trust that urge. On the third morning, I decided I needed materials. A tarp and a dry bag would not hold a person through coastal weather. Wind will tear cord. Salt will eat metal. A single rope route is a single failure point. I needed redundancy, and I needed a way to live without moving every hour to stay comfortable. The highway agency had storage cages along the closed section. Chain-link boxes with padlocks, filled with cones, signage, bolts, wire, sandbags, sometimes rolls of netting. I had opened those cages 100 times on jobs with the right key, or with permission, or with bolt cutters when the paperwork lagged. That day, paperwork did not matter. Survival did. I waited until late afternoon when fog thickened again and the road stayed empty. I clipped into my rope, ascended to the access point, and moved along the shoulder low, staying near brush. I carried no big visible load on the way out, just cutters and a small backpack. The first storage cage I reached sat behind orange barricades. It had a padlock and a chain. I crouched behind it and listened. No engines, no footsteps. I put the cutters on the chain and squeezed. The metal gave with a dull snap. I caught the chain so it did not clatter. Then I opened the cage door slow, held it, and stepped inside. The smell hit first. Rubber cones, old tarps, sun-baked plastic. I grabbed a roll of thick poly sheeting, a bundle of bungee cords, a coil of rope that looked decent, and a small bag of hand tools. I found 2 5-gallon water jugs, empty. I took them anyway. Containers are gold. I shut the door behind me and ran the cut chain back through the latch so the cage looked closed from a distance. Then I moved away fast, staying low. Halfway back toward my access point, I saw movement on the road. A figure in the fog, walking slow, drifting near the center line. I stopped behind brush and watched. The person's arms hung loose, the head tilted slightly down. No purposeful scan, no checking surroundings. The figure bumped a barricade and kept walking. I waited until the figure moved past. Then I crossed the road behind it, stepping light. I could hear a wet sound from the figure's mouth, a constant low noise. The figure did not turn toward me. That told me something important. It meant noise alone did not always trigger attention. movement and proximity mattered. I got back to my access point and returned to the ledge with my load, moving in stages to avoid overbalancing. When I reached the ledge, I laid everything out and started building. I used polysheeting and the thicker tarp to create a wind wall on the open side. I tied it to bolts, then reinforced tie points with tape and extra cord. I stretched a second layer behind it with an air gap, a crude insulation trick. It did not make it warm, it made it less exposed. I rigged a sleeping platform from webbing and a spare piece of netting I found in the cage, tied tight between bolts in a way that kept me off the cold concrete. It sagged, I tightened, it held. My body weight shifted, and the knots creaked, then settled. I set a water jug under my tarp corner and watched drips collect. Slow, steady. I taped a short piece of plastic into a spout shape to guide water. It improved the flow. By the end of that first build day, my ledge looked less like a place somebody hides and more like a place somebody lives. That scared me in a quiet way. A living space means commitment. A living space means a person plans to stay. That night, I heard more voices on the road, closer this time. A man and a woman, both angry. The words were sharp, carried by wind. I caught fragments. No, keep moving. And I am not going down there. And stop, stop, stop. Then a different sound. A thud. And a short cry. After that, nothing. I lay on my netting platform with my harness still on and my lanyard clipped, staring into the dark. I did not turn on my light. I did not pray. I just listened and counted time. Days turned into a routine built around weather and silence. I moved at dawn and near dusk. Midday brought more visibility, more chance of being seen from the road. Night brought wind shifts and the possibility of a headlamp beam giving me away. Fog was my cover. Wind was my enemy. Clear days were the most dangerous because the coast turns into a long, open sightline. I scavenged every 2 or 3 days, always fast, always with a plan, always with a fallback. I hit 3 storage cages over the first 2 weeks. I found more tarps, a roll of rockfall mesh, a box of bolts, and a battered traffic sign that I used as a rigid panel to block wind at the narrow end of the ledge. I found a small propane canister and a compact stove. I found a hard hat that still smelled of sweat from whoever wore it last. I carried everything down in a backpack, never a big visible bundle. I left the big items up at the top until I could break them down or hide them under brush, then moved them down in pieces. One afternoon, I spotted 2 infected on the road for the first time in full daylight. Both moved slow. One had torn clothing and no shoes. The other had a jacket that looked new, still zipped, but the posture was wrong. Shoulders hunched forward, head tilted. They drifted near the barricades, sometimes turning in circles, sometimes stopping completely. Then a gull landed near them, pecked at something on the asphalt, and one infected lunged toward the movement with a sudden burst. Not fast for a runner, but fast for what I expected. The gull flew up. The infected stopped, then resumed drifting. That told me they had a range of movement. Not a constant sprint, not a constant shuffle. Bursts. That made my access trips riskier. I built a second rope route. The main access was a straight drop from the shoulder. Easy, direct, exposed. The second route used a traverse line, anchored around a rock horn, then down a narrower chute that ended at the ledge. Harder, slower, less visible from the road. It gave me an option if somebody cut one rope. I also started hiding my rope ends. When I left ropes fixed, I tucked them behind brush at the top and weighted them so wind would not pull them free. I stopped leaving any bright webbing visible. I used dirt and salt water to dull colors. It felt wrong to ruin good gear, but bright gear is a signal. The radio stayed mostly useless until one morning in week 3. I turned it on for a short check and heard a voice behind the static. Not clear. The words broke apart. I caught evacuation and shelter and a location name that might have been Salinas or San Luis. I could not be sure. Then the signal dropped back into hiss. I adjusted the antenna angle, held it near the rock, then away. The voice came back for a second, then vanished again. I shut the radio off and sat there, staring at it, feeling how information pulls a person toward risk. If I wanted clearer signal, I would need a better antenna. A better antenna would need wire, height, and time. Time on the open shoulder is danger. I did it anyway. That afternoon, with fog rolling in, I climbed up and scavenged a length of copper wire from a wrecked utility box near a turnout. I took a small piece of metal conduit. I built a rough antenna mast that could clip to a bolt at the top access point, then fold down and hide when not used. I ran wire down behind brush, careful to keep it from shining. Back on the ledge, I could pick up the voice more consistently. Still broken, still weak, but enough to learn the world was not fixing itself. The messages talked about quarantines, about road closures, about aggressive, infected individuals. The voice never said zombies. The voice never said apocalypse. The voice tried to keep language professional, and that made it sound worse. At the end of week 3, I found the first sign that another person had been near my place. It was small. I climbed to the top access point early, fog thick, planning to hit a storage cage farther north. At the anchor bolts near the shoulder, one hanger had a fresh scrape. Bare metal showed through where rust and dirt had been rubbed off. It was not from my hardware. I know my carabiners. I know where my steel rubs. This was a different contact mark, wider, heavier, and it sat on the outer edge of the hanger. I crouched and put my head close without touching it. There was also a faint black streak, rubber transfer, the kind a rope protector or a device can leave. Somebody had clipped in here. I stayed crouched behind brush and listened. No footsteps, no voices, no engines, only fog and the ocean. My brain ran through options fast. Another worker from my crew, coming back for gear. A scavenger who found the anchors and decided to climb. A person watching the highway, using the cliff to move unseen. A person who saw my rope ends once and got curious. The mark did not tell me when. Could have been yesterday. Could have been an hour ago. I did not go to the storage cage. I went back down to the ledge and started making my place harder to approach without me knowing. I tied a small strip of tape to the access rope at shoulder height, then another at knee height, then another near the anchor. Not visible from far, visible to me. If somebody moved the rope, the tape positions would change. I set a simple noise alert, a short length of cord tied to a dangling metal washer, hung so it would tap the rock if the rope moved, quiet but audible on the ledge in calm air. I also moved my supplies deeper into my wind wall area and covered them with a spare piece of netting. I left one bag out in the open, a decoy, with only scrap and empty wrappers. That night, I did not sleep. I sat clipped in, knees up, knife in my pocket, small headlamp ready but off. Every time wind pushed the tarp, I tracked the sound. Every time a gull screamed, I checked the rope line. Close to midnight, the rope shifted. Not a big movement, just enough that my tape markers twitched. Then the washer tapped rock once, then again. I stayed still. I kept my head turned toward the access line. I did not grab the rope and give my position away. I waited for the next sound. A faint scrape above, the sound of rubber on rock, controlled, careful. Somebody descending. The person moved slow and deliberate. That told me this was not a panicked tourist. This was somebody who knew rope work, or somebody who had learned fast. The figure came into view at the edge of my headlamp range, a dark shape against darker rock. No light, no voice. The person's legs moved with confidence, feet finding edges without searching. I watched the person descend to the ledge level, then swing slightly and step onto the concrete. The person stopped and stood still. The person's head turned, scanning. I could not see the face, only a silhouette and the outline of a backpack. I stayed behind my wind wall and did nothing. I forced myself to hold still. I could hear my own gear shift slightly when my weight changed. I stopped shifting. The person took 2 steps forward and reached toward my decoy bag. The bag rustled. The person paused, then opened it and moved a hand inside. The person pulled out something, held it up, then put it back. The person's shoulders dropped slightly, a reaction of disappointment or irritation. The person turned toward the back wall where my real supplies sat hidden. I made a choice that felt stupid and necessary at the same time. I clicked my headlamp on for 1 second, aimed low at the ground near the person's boots, then clicked it off again. Not enough to blind, enough to signal. The person froze. A voice came out of the dark, controlled, low. A woman's voice. "Do not do that again." I kept my voice low. "This ledge is occupied." She answered, "I noticed." I said, "Go back up." She said, "I am not here to fight." I did not move out from my wind wall. I kept my lanyard clipped. My mind ran through what I knew. She climbed down with no light. That meant she had practiced this route, or she had done enough climbing to feel edges in the dark. She found my ledge without wandering. That meant she already knew it existed. I said, "Why are you here?" She took a breath, then said, "I saw your rope ends one day. I waited. I watched your pattern. I needed somewhere off the road." I said, "You can find another spot." She said, "This spot works. You know that." Her tone stayed level. No pleading, no threat. That unsettled me more than yelling would have. I asked, "Name?" She said, "Elise." I said, "Last name?" She hesitated, then said, "Harlow." I said, "Mateo." She said, "I figured you had a name." I watched her silhouette shift. She kept her hands visible, low, empty. She did not step closer. She did not step away. She stood in the open, the most exposed place on the ledge, and waited. I said, "You have rope gear?" She said, "Some." I said, "What do you want?" She said, "A deal. I use this ledge during storms. I do not touch your supplies. I do not cut your lines. You do not cut mine." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was bold. A stranger climbed into my hidden space during the collapse and offered rules. That meant she had run out of options. I said, "Where did you come from?" She said, "South. I was camping. Then roads clogged. Then the fight started." Her words stayed clean. She avoided details. That meant either she did not want to remember, or she did not trust me with her story. I said, "Go back up." Now. She did not move for a second. Then she nodded once, slow. All right. She stepped to the rope, clipped in, and started ascending without a sound. I kept my headlamp off. I listened to the rope slide through her device. Controlled, quiet. When the rope stopped moving, I waited another full minute before I moved. After she left, I checked every anchor and every knot. Nothing had been tampered with. That did not comfort me. It meant she had restraint, which meant she had discipline, which meant she had patience. I sat on my platform and stared at the dark road below. Fog had thinned enough that I could see the faint shine of asphalt. No cars, no lights, no help. I realized my ledge was no longer invisible. It had been discovered. The thing that made it safe was gone. The next day, I made another choice I did not want to make. I climbed up at noon, which I hated, and I waited near the access point with my rope coiled and my harness on. I kept low behind brush, eyes on the shoulder. I wanted to see Elise in daylight. I wanted to know what I was dealing with. 2 hours passed with nothing. Then I heard footsteps on gravel. She appeared out of fog, moving cautious, head turning in short checks. She wore a small pack and carried a coil of rope slung across her chest. Her hair was tied back. Her face looked sunburned and tight. She had a climbing helmet, scuffed, and gloves that looked too thin for heavy work. She stopped when she saw the anchor area. Then she crouched and touched the hanger with the scrape mark, checking it. She did not notice me yet. I stood up enough that she could see my outline, then stayed still. Her head snapped toward me. Her hand went to her waistband, not fast, not dramatic, just a practiced motion. She did not pull anything. She froze and watched me. I said, "You tracked my pattern." She said, "I had to." I said, "You used my anchor." She said, "Anchors do not belong to people." I said, "This one kept me alive. It belongs to me." She studied my face. Her eyes did not dart. That told me she had spent time watching movement, reading people. She said, "You want to cut me off? You can. Then you will spend every night waiting for me to come back. That will not help you." I said, "I want you gone." She said, "I want to stay alive." We stood in a strip of damp fog with the ocean noise below and the empty road behind her. It felt unreal that this was now my social life, arguing about survival space on a closed highway. I said, "Do you have food?" She said, "Some." I said, "Do you have a place?" She said, "Not one that stays safe." I thought about pushing her away. I thought about cutting her rope the moment she weighted it. I thought about how that would end. I would still be alone on a ledge, and I would still have to descend for water and supplies, and I would still have to sleep with one eye open. And now I would have a person out there who knew my route and wanted revenge. I said, "You do not come down without warning." She said, "How?" I said, "You hang a marker on the rope at the top, a strip of cloth, red." She said, "I do not have red." I said, "Bright, something I can see from below." She nodded once. "All right?" I said, "You do not touch my supplies. You do not enter my wind wall area." She said, "And you do not touch mine." I said, "You sleep up top." She shook her head. "Storms will push me off the shoulder. The ledge is the point." I said, "You do not stay long, one night. Then you move. She said, I can do that. I did not trust it, but it was a structure. People cling to structure when everything else falls apart. I told myself rules could hold. I said, if you cut a line, you do not get a second chance. She said, same for you. After that, she clipped in and descended, slower than last night, and I watched her move to the far end of the ledge, away from my space. She set down her pack, sat with her back to rock, and kept her hands in her lap. I went back behind my wind wall and did my normal tasks, checking water catch, sorting food, repairing a frayed cord. I did not stare at her constantly. I did not relax either. My mind kept tracking her position even while my hands worked. She stayed one night, then left before dawn, true to her word. For 3 days, she did not return. That should have eased me. It did not. It meant she was out there surviving, watching, deciding. On the 4th day, weather changed. Wind came hard from the northwest and stayed. The ocean turned rough. Spray lifted higher. My wind wall snapped and strained. One of my tie points started to tear through the tarp grommet, the metal ring pulling at fabric. I reinforced it with a knot that cinched around the tarp material itself, not the grommet. The tarp fluttered and slapped. I used tape to quiet the worst edges. The wind kept building. By evening, rain hit sideways, not the gentle coastal mist. Real rain, driven. Water came under the overhang and splattered the ledge. My platform got damp. My clothes started to hold moisture. I kept moving, kept adjusting, kept redirecting water into containers. That night, the washer alert tapped again. Elise descended in the storm, using a headlamp on the lowest setting with her hand cupped over it. She moved fast, almost urgent. She stepped onto the ledge and said, I am staying tonight. I did not argue. I pointed to the far end, and she went there. In the middle of the night, a gust hit so hard that my wind wall bowed inward and the tarp seam creaked. I grabbed the nearest bolt hanger and clipped in my second lanyard without thinking. I sat against rock and held a section of tarp with one hand to keep it from tearing. Elise's voice came from the dark, tight. Your anchors hold. I answered, so far. The storm lasted into morning. The ledge did what it was built to do. It sheltered. It held. When daylight finally brightened the fog, I saw the road for a moment between bands of rain. Something had changed up there. A new coil of rope sat near the shoulder, half hidden in brush. Not mine. It was thicker, darker. Beside it, a small bundle of gear, also not mine. Elise saw it too. She said, he is back. I turned toward her end of the ledge. He. She hesitated, then said, a man. He watched me on the road yesterday. He followed from a distance. He saw me climb. I said, you did not mention him. She said, I was not sure. I did not want you to panic. I almost snapped at her, but the storm had already taught me something. People do not hide threats out of kindness. People hide threats to keep control. I said, describe him. She said, mid-30s, dark jacket, backpack. He walked steady. He did not drift. He watched the cliffs, not the road. We both stared up at the shoulder. Rain slid down the rock face in sheets. The rope coil did not move. That did not mean the man was gone. It meant the man was patient. I said, he knows the route now. Elise nodded. Yes. That day became work. I reinforced my wind wall, then I built a secondary barrier inside, using the rigid traffic sign panel and rockfall mesh. The idea was simple. If somebody stepped onto the ledge and tried to rush my space, the barrier would slow the person and make noise. I also moved my most critical items into a clipped bundle that could be hauled in seconds. Food, radio, lighter, water tablets, spare cord, bolt kit. If I had to cut away and descend, I wanted the option. Elise worked on her end too, tying her pack to bolts, building her own small windshield. She did not ask permission. She just did it. That night, the rope moved again. This time it was not Elise. I knew her pattern. I had watched her descend. This movement was heavier. The rope ran faster through the device, then stopped, then ran again in short bursts. I stayed behind my barrier and waited. A man's voice came from the edge above the ledge, low, confident. "Hello down there." Elise froze on her end. She did not answer. I said, "Go back up." He laughed once, quiet. "No." He stepped down onto the ledge in a smooth motion. He had a headlamp on, pointed down, and a climbing harness that looked worn. He carried a short pry bar tucked into his belt. His face looked clean in the weak light, but his eyes looked tired and sharp. He said, "Nice setup, both of you." I kept my voice flat. "You leave." He looked at my barrier and nodded slightly. "You know what you are doing. That is good. I do too." He turned his head toward Elise's end. "You did not mention a roommate, Elise." Elise's voice came out tight. "Go away, Grant." So the man had a name. Grant. That meant Elise had prior contact with him. That meant this was not just a random scavenger who stumbled onto anchors. Grant smiled. "You are not in charge anymore." I said, "What do you want?" Grant shifted his weight and looked at my supply pile behind the barrier. Food, water, rope, a place off the road. I said, "No." Grant's smile faded. He looked toward the rope line above. "Then I cut your access. You starve on your ledge. You climb out, and I take what you drop." He said it in the same tone somebody uses for a work plan. No anger, no heat. That calm threat was worse than yelling. Elise said, "You cannot do that." Grant looked at her and shrugged. "I can do whatever works." My mind ran through physics, not emotion. He could cut a rope. He could also cut my hidden rope ends at the top. He could wait. He could throw rocks. He could make noise and draw infected toward my access point. He could force me into the open. I said, "If you cut a line, you lose your own route. You die on the road." Grant smiled again. "I have other routes." That told me enough. He had been using Cliff's before he found mine. He had experience. He was not bluffing. I kept my voice low. "Back up. Leave." Grant took one step toward my barrier. I did not pull a gun. I did not have one. What I had was a rope bag and gravity and the fact that I knew every bolt on this ledge. I grabbed a coil of rockfall mesh I had staged behind my barrier and yanked. The mesh slid forward with a harsh scraping sound and spilled across the ledge toward Grant's boots. Grant stepped back fast, foot catching the mesh edge. His balance shifted toward the open side. I did not rush him. I reached for the bolt hanger nearest my position and clipped a short line to the mesh, then pulled hard, dragging the mesh toward the open edge. The mesh moved under Grant's feet again. He grabbed for the rope line, caught it, and steadied himself. His headlamp swung, light streaking across my barrier and Elise's end. He cursed under his breath, not loud, then said, "All right, you want to play that way." He stepped back and shifted his body toward ascent. "I will wait. You both need water. You both need food. I have time." He started climbing without hurry. When he was gone, the ledge felt smaller. Elise stayed silent for a full minute. Then she said, "He followed me from a turnout near the river. I thought I lost him." I said, "You knew him before." She said, "One day on a trail months back. He tried to attach himself to my trip. He kept pushing. I left." I said, "He is not leaving now." That night, I did not sleep at all. I kept expecting the rope to move again, expecting Grant to come down angry. He did not. He did what he promised. He waited. By morning, I heard him above, moving around the shoulder, not hiding his steps. He wanted us to hear him. He wanted us to picture him checking our rope ends, watching our access. A gull screamed, and Grant shouted at it. I heard the voice clear, human, annoyed. Then his footsteps moved away again. The next week turned into a pressure test. Every time I needed to go up for scavenging, I risked running into Grant. Every time I stayed down, my supplies dwindled. Elise offered to go up during one fog bank to check if Grant had left. I told her no. She went anyway the next day without telling me. She came back down with her jaw tight and said, "He is still up there." I said, "You went up alone." She said, "I had to know." We started coordinating without saying the word. One person watched while the other moved. One person listened while the other adjusted gear. We kept conversations short because long talk fills space that should be used for planning. On day 3 of Grant's waiting game, he changed tactics. He did not cut our ropes. He used noise. In the afternoon, we heard banging on metal up on the shoulder. Then a car alarm started, the kind that cycles and pauses, then cycles again. It echoed along the cliffs. It carried far. Elise looked at me from her end. "He wants to draw them." I nodded. "He wants the road to fill." It worked. Within an hour, infected started drifting into the closed section from both directions, drawn by the alarm's repeating pattern. Some moved slow. Some surged in bursts, their heads turned toward the sound. Their bodies followed. They gathered near the alarm source, bumping into barricades, into each other, into guardrails. From the ledge, we watched the road become a moving cluster of bodies. Not a sprinting horde, not a movie stampede, but a dense problem that would make any trip across the shoulder nearly impossible without contact. Grant's voice floated down once, faint. "Still want to share?" I did not answer. Instead, I worked. I took my spare rope and built a lower exit. There was a rough slope below the ledge that dropped toward a narrow rocky shelf above the surf. Not safe in heavy swell, but usable during a calm window. I had noticed it on my first descent, but ignored it because it meant extra exposure. Now it was my best alternate. I rigged a line down to that shelf, anchored to 2 bolts, backed up to a rock horn. I patted the contact points with scraps of rubber to reduce wear. I tested it with weight, then tested again. Elise watched me work, then said, "Where does it go?" I said, "Down, away." She said, "The beach." I said, "A shelf. You can move north under the cliff. You can move out of sight of the road." She nodded once. "If the water allows it." That became our plan, even though I hated it. I did not want to trade one trap for another, but Grant had already changed the game. He turned the road into a wall of infected. He turned our access into a choke point. 2 days later, the alarm stopped. Not because Grant got bored, because the battery died. The infected stayed, milling and drifting, still clustered. Some wandered away, some returned. The road remained risky. That night, Grant came down again. He descended slow, careful, headlamp on, not hiding anymore. He stepped onto the ledge and looked around with the calm of a man entering a room he plans to own. He said, "Last offer." I said, "No offers." Grant's eyes flicked toward my barrier, then toward Elise. "You both act tough. You both still need calories." He pulled a small package from his pocket and tossed it onto the ledge between us. It slid and stopped near my mesh. A protein bar, sealed. He said, "Proof I can be reasonable." I stared at the bar. A sealed bar could be bait. Not poisoned, not some cartoon trick, but bait in a social sense. If I took it, I accepted his frame. If I left it, I wasted food. I said, "Keep it." Grant shrugged. "Suit yourself." He stepped closer. "Here is what happens next. I cut your rope ends at the top, not the line you clip into, the hidden ends, the second route too. Then you have one choice. You come up and you negotiate, or you go down into the water and hope you do not slip." He looked at the lower edge of the ledge, noticing my new rigging. His eyes narrowed slightly. He had seen my alternate. He said, "You built a beach exit. Smart." I said, "Leave." He smiled without warmth. "Tomorrow." Then he ascended again, taking his time. When he was gone, Elise said, "He will cut them." I said, "Yes." Elise said, "We go down tonight." I did not answer right away because I wanted a different option to appear in my head. It did not. I said, "We go when the swell drops." We spent the next hours preparing. I packed my critical bundle. I clipped it to my harness. I tightened every strap. Elise did the same with her gear. We did not take everything. We took what kept us alive. I checked the lower rope again. I checked the knots. I checked the bolt hangers for any new scrape marks. None. That meant Grant had not come down again since his last visit. We waited for a lull between sets of waves. The ocean does that if you watch long enough. A pattern emerges. Not perfect, not safe, but usable. Near midnight, the swell eased for a window that looked possible. I clipped into the lower line and descended first, moving slow, feet searching for stable rock. The shelf below was slick in spots. I kept my weight low and my movements deliberate. When I reached the shelf, I turned off my headlamp completely and let the moonlight and foam glow guide me. The shelf was narrow, but it existed. Rock underfoot, spray in my face, wind cold. Elise descended behind me, controlled, silent. We moved north under the cliff, staying in shadow, using hands on rock. The highway above was invisible from our angle, but we could hear the infected sometimes, faint noises drifting down, scraping footsteps, occasional moans that rose and fell. We reached a spot where the cliff angled inward and created a deeper pocket. I could see a small path up, a rough scramble that led toward brush, and eventually, the shoulder farther north where the infected cluster thinned. I looked back once toward my ledge. I could not see it. That hurt more than I expected. I had built a home out of bolts and tarps. I was leaving it to a man who did not earn it. We climbed. Hands on wet dirt, feet on roots. moving in short bursts, pausing to listen. We reached the brush line and stopped. Above, the road was visible through gaps. The infected cluster near the old alarm car was still there, but the density was lower at this northern edge. Elise whispered, "We do not run." I nodded. We moved along the shoulder, using the brush line as cover, stepping around abandoned cones and debris. A dead battery lantern lay on its side. A backpack sat open with clothes spilling out. A shoe in the road with no owner nearby. We passed an infected standing near a guardrail, head tilted toward the ocean. It did not turn. We kept moving. We reached a turnout where an old maintenance gate sat open. Beyond it, a dirt service track led inland toward the hills. Before we entered the track, I heard a sound behind us. A rope device sliding on line, a controlled descent sound, faint, carried by wind. Grant. He had followed. He had waited for us to move. He wanted the ledge empty. He also wanted to make sure we did not escape with all the supplies. Elise looked at me, eyes wide in the dim. No words, just the shared understanding. We moved into the service track fast, still not running, but urgent. We kept to the dirt, avoiding loose gravel that would crunch loud. Behind us, a shout echoed from the highway. Grant's voice, sharp. "Mateo!" I did not answer. We climbed the service track into the hills, away from the coast, away from the ledge, away from the road full of infected. The air changed as we gained elevation, less salt, more dry brush, more dust. Grant's voice shouted again, closer. He had found the track. Elise said, very low, "He will not stop." I said, "Then we make him stop." Up ahead, the service track crossed a narrow cut where the hillside had been graded. Loose dirt and small rocks sat piled on the edge, the kind of unstable pile crews leave when they clear drains. I moved to the inside of the cut and grabbed a chunk of rock about the size of my fist. I set it on the edge of the pile, then another, building a small, unstable stack. Not a trap with spikes, not anything dramatic. Just gravity waiting. Elise watched, then added 2 rocks of her own. We backed away and crouched behind brush on the uphill side, out of direct view from the track. Grant appeared a minute later, breathing hard, headlamp bobbing, pry bar in hand. He moved fast now, angry, careless. He did not scan the cut. He charged through it. His shoulder brushed the rock pile. The stacked rocks shifted and slid. Dirt followed. The pile gave way in a short rush, not a landslide, but enough to knock Grant's feet sideways. He stumbled, arms flailing, pry bar clanging on rock. He dropped to one knee, then slipped fully, sliding down the cut and slamming into the lower bank. His headlamp bounced and went dark. He shouted, furious, and tried to stand. One foot skidded on loose dirt. I stepped out from cover and kept distance. I held a rock in both hands, ready, not lifted yet. I said, "Leave." Grant's eyes locked on me in the dark. He tried to smile, but it came out wrong, forced. "You set me up." I said, "Leave." He shifted his weight and reached for the pry bar. Elise's voice cut in from behind brush, steady. "Grant, stop." Grant froze for 1 second. Then he laughed, sharp. "You two think you are a team now." He stepped forward and his foot slipped again. He caught himself on the bank, fingers digging into dirt. I did not move closer. I did not rush him. I waited him out. Grant realized he was in a bad position. Loose ground underfoot. 2 people above him. No headlamp. Pry bar out of reach. He swallowed, then said, "Fine, Go. I will find another way. I kept my rock held ready. You go back down. He looked down the track, then back at me. His eyes showed calculation. He was deciding whether pride mattered. He stood slow, hands open. All right. He turned and started backing down the track, careful now, quiet. When he was far enough that his footsteps faded, Elise stepped out from cover and exhaled through her nose, a controlled release. She did not say anything else. We did not stay there. We kept moving up the service track until we reached a spot where the dirt road met a narrow paved access lane leading toward an old maintenance yard inland. The yard was fenced, gates half open, equipment parked at angles. We slipped inside, staying low, checking corners. No workers, no voices, just a place abandoned in a hurry. Inside a small office trailer, we found water jugs stacked in a corner, still sealed. We found a first aid kit. We found a paper map pinned to a wall with colored markers showing closures along the coast. The map made the situation feel official and hopeless at the same time. I sat on the trailer floor and drank water in small, controlled sips. Elise did the same. We did not talk much. Words felt expensive. After a few minutes, Elise said, "What now?" I looked at the map again. Inland routes, back roads, forest service tracks. No guarantee of safety, but less exposure than the highway. I said, "We keep moving. We find a place that does not need one rope to stay alive." Elise nodded once. Good. Before we left the yard, I did one last thing. I found a roll of bright survey tape and tore off a long strip. I wrote one word on it with a marker from the office desk. Grant. I tied it to the yard gate where anybody passing would see it. Then I tied another strip beside it that said, "Do not trust." Not justice, not revenge, a warning. That felt practical. We left the yard before noon, moving inland under low cloud cover, taking a service road that climbed into brush and pines. The coast disappeared behind us. The ocean noise faded. The world got quieter, which did not mean safer. I kept thinking about the ledge, about how I believed invisibility meant control. It did not. It meant delay. Somebody always arrives eventually. I did not know what happened to Grant after that. He might have gone back to the ledge and lived there. He might have gotten trapped by infected on the road. He might have found another cliff route and kept hunting for resources. The map on the wall told me the closures were spreading. The radio messages told me official response was shrinking. A man built for taking what he wants would not suddenly become a better person. That night, Elise and I camped under trees on a slope above a dry creek bed, using a tarp strung low in a windbreak of brush. I kept my rope coiled within reach. I kept my radio wrapped in cloth to protect it from moisture. I kept my eyes on the dark gaps between trunks. Elise lay on her side and stared at the tarp roof, quiet. After a long time, she said, "You were right about the anchors. One point of failure." I said, "I was wrong about the ledge." She asked, "How?" I said, "I treated it as a secret. Secrets always get out." We did not say anything else after that. Sleep came in short fragments, broken by small noises and the need to check the dark. Not fear in words, fear in behavior, in the way my hands kept returning to knots and buckles without thinking. In the days that followed, my life stopped being a cliffside hiding place story and turned into a moving story. We traveled inland, avoided towns, scavenged from small maintenance sheds and abandoned vehicles, always moving with a plan, always leaving before a place felt familiar. My rope skills still mattered, but in a different way. I used them to get over washed-out cuts, to lower packs down steep slopes, to climb into a locked storage loft without breaking glass. Elise proved useful in ways I did not expect. She had a calm eye for trails. She had patience for waiting out risk. She had a way of watching without making noise. She did not ask for comfort. She asked for function. We kept the rules simple. No secrets about threats. No solo runs without telling the other. No hero moves. If something looked wrong, we backed off. Sometimes, on high ground, we could see the coast again, a thin blue band far away. I would catch myself scanning for the cut in the cliff where my ledge sat. I never found it from that distance. That was probably for the best. I started this whole thing thinking I could hang above the world and wait until it fixed itself. That was my premise, and it was wrong. The world does not fix itself on a schedule that cares about one man on a cliff. What saved me was not the ledge. It was the discipline that built the ledge, the habit of checking anchors twice, the habit of planning for failure, and the willingness to move when a plan stopped working. The ledge bought me time. Time to learn the rules of the new world. Time to learn that people with calm voices can be the most dangerous part. Time to learn that survival does not reward pride. If you are hearing this later, if you are sitting somewhere safe and trying to imagine what it felt like, I cannot give you a clean lesson with a neat ending. What I can give you is a practical truth from a man who trusted bolts in a cliff. Do not build a life that depends on one rope. And do not assume hidden means safe. We kept walking inland the next morning, packs tight, gear quiet, eyes scanning the trail ahead. Not because we felt brave, because stopping meant letting the wrong person catch up.